Welcome to the Hollywood in Toto podcast, the right take on entertainment. The HiT cast offers a weekly look at Hollywood from a conservative point of view. Sick of media bias infecting Hollywood headlines? Tired of stars insulting your views? HiT has your back. Now, here's your host, Christian Toto.
Welcome to episode 109 of the Hollywood in Toto podcast, the right take on entertainment. This week we're speaking with Hoaxed directors Scooter Downey and Jon du Toit. The pair talk about their cinematic dreams, why they needed to skewer media bias one more time in the film, and why conservative outlets haven't covered Hoaxed nearly as much as they should have. And yeah, that's a problem. You know, one of the most fascinating debates I've seen in quite a while took place on YouTube this week. And of course, the mainstream media pretty much snoozed right through it. The show, The Joe Rogan Experience. Joe invited Captain Twitter himself, Jack Dorsey, back on the show, along with a high-ranking official from Twitter, and Tim Poole. He's a left-leaning reporter who tweets at Timcast. And I have to say, he's probably more honest and fair than 90% of his peers. That may be an understatement. He's also left of center, but speaks out furiously against media bias. He's amazing. Of course, the debate raged about Twitter and whether it's biased against conservatives. The podcast itself was 3+ hours long, and I have to say I haven't listened to every minute of it, maybe about 2/3 of it. Wow, pretty amazing stuff. Now, of course, Tim Poole shredded many of the Team Twitter's arguments about their platform, but at the very least, let's give Team Twitter some credit because they showed up and withstood some pretty serious fire. Of course, the next step is not just listening, but actually making the changes needed to the platform, but that remains to be seen. But as it stands right now, we learned plenty about Twitter and also about the culture at large from that particular episode. Yes, Twitter is biased against conservatives. You really can't come away with any other conclusion than that. And Twitter's goals for free speech, pretty darn scary. Also scary, their arrogance on the subject. You have to listen to really understand just what I mean. And of course, for this listener, the mainstream media fails again. Why on earth would they not cover this story? It was an amazing debate that touches all of our lives, at least anyone who's on social media at all, who cares about free speech for that matter. Let's have some numbers to back this up. That YouTube clip in general, now this isn't counting how many people downloaded the show itself. This is just the YouTube version. More than 2.5 million views in less than 4 days. That's amazing. And again, it doesn't count what happened with the podcast itself, Stitcher, all the different ways you can listen to the Joe Rogan Experience, or on Facebook or on Twitter, people sharing that information, or even the Facebook impressions. This one had a huge impact right off the bat, and the media didn't even cover it. I did a Google News search on the subject and found maybe a couple of items on it. Nothing more. Now, maybe they'll be slow to the take. Maybe in the next few days they'll be covering this more aggressively. But I think if they haven't covered it by now, they're going to keep on ignoring it. The mainstream media, man. Suffering another body blow, self-inflicted, of course. Captain Marvel opens wide this weekend, and you can read my take on the movie at HollywoodInToto.com. To commemorate the film's release, the HiT cast talked to show contributors Jim Culver and Jim Lakely about the pop culture landscape surrounding the movie. First up, Thredonia's own Jim Culver. He talks about how star Brie Larson has done all she can to chase some viewers away from her own movie. It's amazing. And then Jim Lakely from the Heartland Institute takes the media to task for openly biased coverage of the film. Hey guys and gals, put down those pom-poms. You're reporters. Try to remember that. I hope you enjoy this double blast of MCU goodness about Captain Marvel. All right, well, we've got Jim Culver back. He's from Thredonia.com. You'll have a link to that on the show notes page at HollywoodInToto.com. And, of course, we're talking about Captain Marvel, the big movie opening this weekend. And what's interesting to me, there's lots of interesting things about this particular film and about the approach to marketing, but it's really how they're doing something that's been done before, how the actors are getting hyper-political and appearing to be divisive when they're promoting their film. I can't understand it. I get where actors want to be woke and they want to push a particular agenda, but they seem to do it simultaneously alienating maybe even as much as half of the crowd. So, Jim, take it from there. What are you seeing with the Captain Marvel rollout so far?
Well, yeah, I would definitely say this is the most divisive of the MCU movies so far. Up until recently, the movies have been diverse, but they've also been very inclusive and very positive and very respectful toward everyone. Even Black Panther, which was, 95-96% black cast, was still very inclusive. And in fact, at one point, Ryan Coogler, the director, was asked about it, and he flat out said, this movie is for everyone. This isn't for a specific race. It's not for a specific country. It's for everyone. I want everyone to enjoy this movie and get something out of it. So, the MCU up until this point has been very, very inclusive, and they've been trying to win everyone over. Captain Marvel is kind of a complete 180 from that. And almost from the beginning, and I really think that Brie Larson was hired specifically because she is an activist, has been more about being more exclusionary and, starting with her statements about A Wrinkle in Time, which is where she specifically said, I don't want to hear white men's opinions about this movie that was made by non-white men. And, of course, the media tried to spin that as saying, well, she's asking for more inclusivity. And the same thing when she said that she noticed that her press corps was overwhelmingly white and male, and she wanted to change that. They tried to spin that as saying, well, she's just asking for more diversity, but, not really. She specifically called out a certain race and a certain gender and said, we have too much of this and we need less of it.
Yeah, one of the things that jumped out at me about that particular comment was, you're not the editor. You're not the person in charge of hiring people, of assigning people. That's not your place. You could mention it for sure, but your job is to act in movies and promote movies, and you can talk about things. But she specifically, it seems like she engineered a disabled person to interview her for the Marie Claire English version, the UK version. And that's not your gig. Your gig is to talk and to act and to promote. Your job is not to assign stories. And I thought that was really interesting, and how no journalists seem to be upset about that.
Right. And, traditionally, you're absolutely right. No, it is not an actor's place to do that. Their job is to promote the movie, not to try to kind of take over how it's marketed, how it's sold, how it's reviewed. But again, Marvel has really empowered her to kind of take the reins and say whatever she wants and act like she's in charge. She signed a 7-picture deal. She got $5 million, and she's unless they make a big change, that she's the face of the MCU for the next decade, probably, just like Robert Downey Jr. was for the last 10 years. So she really has been empowered to kind of control things however she wants. So, it's kind of baffling. I mean, it makes sense if you understand the ideology behind it, but certainly on the surface, it seems like it makes no sense at all.
I almost think that, this is as cynical as you can be, they spent the last decade building up this impossibly strong brand, entertaining the heck out of us, doing everything right when it comes to promoting and making really good movies for the most part. And
Absolutely.
now they say, okay, we've got that. Now we can go off in the direction we really want to go. And I hope I'm 100% wrong on that account. But there's all this talk about phase this, phase that. It's kind of nerd speak, and I try not to get too lost in it. But if this is the direction they want to go in, oh my goodness. And I think what we may see is the Star Wars effect, where you've got a beloved brand that makes $1 gazillion with each new installment, suddenly get some dings in the armor, where maybe not everyone is looking forward to the next installment of Star Wars because they're fearing more lectures, more social justice engineering. I know I fall into that camp, and a lot of people elsewhere are too. And then we saw the Solo, a Star Wars movie, underperform at the box office. And I think even The Last Jedi didn't do as strongly as you think. So
right.
One last question. Could this be the future of Marvel, where it's more alienating, it's less profitable, but it's what they want to do?
I think it absolutely could be, because, I mean, if you look at Marvel Comics, I'm not going to go too deep into this, but it's kind of like a dark mirror into where the movies are probably going to go eventually. For decades, Marvel Comics was very, very inclusive and just basically told stories. I mean, there was some diversity, but you weren't hammered over the head with it. And then about 10 years ago, most of the top talents went off to the MCU or to Netflix to make the movies and TV shows. And what stayed behind were writers that were hired from Tumblr, young adult writers, very, very far left ideologues, obsessed with identity politics. And they started to push that in the books hardcore, and readership dropped like a stone. I mean, it's a fraction of what it was 10 years ago. And books are getting canceled left and right. And what they essentially did in the Marvel Comics universe was wipe out all the traditional white male heroes like Wolverine and Captain America and Tony Stark, and replace them with minorities and gay characters and women. And the books simply weren't well written, and they didn't sell. But there was a belief that there was some audience on Tumblr and BuzzFeed that was going to increase readership, and of course that didn't happen. And of course they're still pushing forward full steam. And you can definitely see the movies going in that direction at some point here, because essentially with Endgame they're going to wipe the slate clean and start over with new heroes. And what they're talking about is mostly women and minorities. Again, you're going to have, Black Widow, which is a great character, but you're also going to have more Captain Marvel, and you're going to have, they're claiming they're going to have Miss Marvel, who is a Muslim teenager, and her big preoccupation is Islamophobia. I mean, you're already seeing hints. I mean, in the next Spider-Man movie, one of the teenagers who's in his group is transgender. And they're not making a big deal about that, but it's there. And so they're kind of testing the waters to see how far they can push this in the MCU. And yeah, I think the future is essentially that it will go into decline unless there's a big change. And people are just going to lose interest for the most part, and probably start going to other franchises. DC is getting a lot better, winning over a lot more people with Aquaman and the upcoming Shazam. And I think that it breaks my heart to say this because the MCU is fantastic. It's been my favorite franchise of the last decade. But I really see them making some negative changes that are going to drive a lot of audiences away, and they'll probably keep right on making the movies because that's what the stories they want to tell and the characters they want to push, but it's not going to be special and it's not going to be nearly as popular.
Yeah, that's amazing. And you kind of gave me some information within that I didn't know, and I feel like I've studied this pretty intensively, so I'm so glad I had you on the show, Jim. Jim Culver from 3donia.com. Glad to have you back. We'll talk to you again in the near future, and hopefully you and I are wrong, but boy, all the tea leaves are saying we're right as rain. So, Jim, thanks so much, and we'll talk to you again.
Thanks a lot for having me.
You're listening to the Hollywood in Toto podcast, the right take on entertainment.
Well, thank you, Jim, for rejoining the HitCast. Of course, Jim is the communications director for the Heartland Institute. We'll have a link to that on the show notes page at hollywoodintoto.com. And we're talking more about Captain Marvel, and specifically how the press and the film critic communities have been dealing with the film. It's been fascinating, and I'll let you start off, and I'm going to jump in for sure. But what's been your take about how the media has embraced or responded to the fact that there is a Captain Marvel movie opening this weekend?
Yeah, well, the conservative media obviously have been kind of reporting on the debut of this, or the premiere of this movie, for about a month now, really intently. A great place to look for that is one of my favorite blogs, Ace of Spades HQ. Ace, they're very well known, and you chuckle because you know Ace as well, Christian. It's had a lot to say about the Captain Marvel movie, and that it's basically woke Marvel. And and Brie Larson. I mean, I am really happy that I am not working for the marketing department for Disney and Marvel, because I would not be sleeping well at night when the star of this movie is actively trying to destroy and insult the core fans of the Marvel Cinematic Universe. It's one thing to, as you mentioned earlier, that she had said that she had said earlier about the movie A Wrinkle in Time, and that she doesn't care what a 40-year-old white man thinks about A Wrinkle in Time. That movie wasn't made for you, she said. Well, true, fair enough. But you know what? Captain Marvel was made for 40-year-old white men. The core audience for Marvel movies are teenagers, children, and really, adults, middle-aged men, frankly, who have been watching these movies since the smash surprise of Iron Man about more than a decade ago, and had grown up reading these comic books. So the right-wing media has been, almost rooting for this to fail because it's been promoted by Brie Larson as some kind of social justice movie and not really what it should be, which is a fun popcorn superhero movie. But it's not just the right-wing media. I mean, it's been funny to watch the traditional media and even left-wing media as they've gotten to see the film and reviewed it. The AV Club, which is a pretty woke site, calls the movie underwhelming. The Associated Press said it was, quote, entirely average. If you read the review in the Atlantic magazine, quite literary magazine, they're really trying hard in that review to like it, but they kind of don't. Even Vox, you can't get more woke than Vox. They said that Captain Marvel, quote, deserved a better movie. IndieWire said it was massively disappointing. Screen Crush says it never quite soars. And this is, I think, a real problem for Marvel. And I know in email exchanges, which is why I'm on your podcast today, Christian, I had predicted, what was it, about a month ago, they said the opening was going to be about $160 million. That was their prediction. 2 weeks ago, a column on Forbes said it was going to be $150 million. Now we're talking $100 million maybe. And I told you 2 weeks ago that I'd put the over-under and I'd put pretty good money on it, finishing under 120 million and maybe even barely 100 million. And that is a huge failure for this film.
It's amazing to say that that's a failure, but you're potentially right. And we'll have to see the final numbers. But these movies have to be huge, huge, huge. And I think what is going on, the couple things happening here is I think Marvel is in danger of hurting their brand, which until now is bulletproof. It's why it's going to make between 80 and 120 million. I think it's a pretty fair estimate. So that's what they've developed over the last 10 so years. We make great stories, we please the fans, we don't get overly political. Sure, there's some meaty subjects in our stories, but it's not going to hit you over the head. And I think there's kind of a record scratch moment with Brie Larson's Captain Marvel. Talk about sort of the cheering section aspect of this, because that always interests me. We've seen websites saying, well, Rotten Tomatoes nixed the early reviews of the film. No, it wasn't the early reviews. It was intent on seeing. But they kind of changed the words around a little bit to make it sound like reviews, to make it sound like they were trying to doom this movie, where it was just sort of let's take the pulse of the cultural moment. Well, talk about that, because I think that's fascinating, too. It's just basically lying to the public to get to run defense for this project.
Yeah, I mean, Rotten Tomatoes actually just took down all of that. Every movie got a wanna-see rating from people. Get excited about it, the buzz. You want that because it helps generate buzz for your film. Of course, this film was not generating good buzz. It was generating negative buzz. It kind of reminds me, like the Lady Ghostbusters, the reboot of Ghostbusters, which almost ruined Melissa McCarthy for me. I watched about 30 minutes of that film and I couldn't take it anymore. But she's still great, so I've just pretended Lady Ghostbusters never happened. But if you look at the Rotten Tomatoes reviews of that, reviewers loved it because it was, empowerment of women. In fact, famously, the whole cast, I think, was on, was it Ellen, where they talked about this as the feminist movement coming to the fore in a big blockbuster film. That kind of stuff turns off audiences. People want to go to movies to be entertained, especially when it's something silly and goofy like Ghostbusters, or something that's supposed to be soaring and majestic and heroic like a superhero movie. You just want to be entertained. Yes, it can be meaty subjects, but hammering us over the head with social justice warrior stuff and with feminism and all of that. Look, Wonder Woman is one of my favorite superhero films of all time. It had an opening weekend of $103 million. It made $800 million globally and $412 million just in the United States. There's no way Captain Marvel approaches those numbers, especially those final cumulative numbers.
Yeah, and the missing ingredient, there's two missing ingredients there, is Wonder Woman was a very good film, and also it didn't have an agenda where the stars and the director and the producers and the marketing team behind it made it woke. It just said, hey, you've all been waiting for this movie. We've got a great actress as your lead. Here it is. Hope you enjoy it. And people responded. And I almost think that what we're seeing now with the Captain Marvel push is hey, we don't have a lot of confidence in this project. We got to kind of talk up something different. And while I think that will attract a certain segment of fans, I think it'll push away more than it attracts.
Yeah, I mean, the leftists in the media, want want this movie to succeed. They want it to be important. They make a big deal about this being the first Marvel superhero movie with a female as the lead character, ignoring the fact that there's plenty of strong female characters in the Marvel Cinematic Universe. It's taken a while, but apparently Black Widow, played fantastically by Scarlett Johansson ever since she was introduced during Iron Man 2, is slated for production. I mean, might even be in production right now, but there's going to be an independent Black Widow movie. That, frankly, should have been done before Captain Marvel. Look, if you look even at the comic books, Captain Marvel is a character that Marvel has been trying to shove down the throats of fans of Marvel's universe in the printed comic book for quite a while. They've had to reboot the print several times because they can't quite get it right. Well, they can't get it right because people don't like it. It's not a good character. It's not compelling. People are not interested in Captain Marvel. Yet here is Disney trying to make an entire tentpole movie out of a character that doesn't really have the fan base to warrant it. And there is a rumor going around that 2 months after this movie, the Avengers Endgame comes out, and there is a rumor out there that I've heard that they've actually filmed 2 different versions of the ending of that film, one prominently featuring Captain Marvel and one not so prominently featuring Captain Marvel, kind of hedging their bets on how bad of a disaster perhaps that the Captain Marvel independent movie is going to be. I think that if that rumor is true, that tells you a lot about what a misfire this could be. Yeah.
A couple other quick comments. I read a box office tracking feature on Deadline.com, and they mentioned something positive, and the next sentence was a one-word sentence that said fantastic, directly editorializing in their coverage. And also the Daily Beast, which leans pretty hard left, and although they do occasionally write some pretty interesting stories, they had this whole piece about the trolls attacking Captain Marvel. So, when Ghostbusters underperformed, the media had to kind of eventually say, oh, yeah, by the way, Sony's going to lose about $70 million because this movie wasn't the hit that they expected. Just one last question. What's the media reaction going to be if the box office isn't that strong or the movie just doesn't have legs?
They're probably going to say the trolls killed it, but that's also false. If the movie is good, all the trolls in the world, all the fanboys who if the theory is right that they just can't stand seeing a strong woman on screen, will be proven false if the movie is good. If the movie has a compelling story, if the character is interesting, and if the acting is good. What we've heard, I have not seen the film yet, but I've read quite a few reviews. The reviews say that Brie Larson's acting is pretty wooden and that the character itself is almost invincible, that we like characters like Iron Man because even though he's amazing and can do all these amazing things, he's still vulnerable because he has to, protect his heart from being torn to shreds with technology. Even Thor has some problems. He has to deal with Loki. He has to get the approval of his father. He's a demigod, and he is a conflicted and sometimes vulnerable character. Captain Marvel is this invincible superwoman who is just destroying everything in her wake and, kind of being annoyed by sexism by men. It just doesn't seem like a story that's going to carry. So if this movie fails, it would be because the movie stinks. And if it succeeds, it'll be because the movie is good. That's all there is to it.
Yeah, and I think that the Marvel brand gets you that big opening weekend. But where it goes from there is anyone's guess. Well, Jim, thank you so much for weighing in on this. We hope to check in with you down the road on other pop culture subjects. Of course, Jim Lankley is the communications director for the Heartland Institute. Jim, thanks again.
Always a pleasure, Christian.
You're listening to my daddy's podcast. He still sleeps with the nightlight on.
Now here's the hit tweet of the week. You'd think woke celebrities would be all over Representative Ilhan Omar for her serial anti-Semitic comments, but you'd be wrong. In fact, far-left comedian John Fugelsang offered this unique defense of the anti-Semitic congresswoman this week. Hey Media, at Ilhan MN, has been even more critical of Saudi Arabia's civilian government than she has of Israel's. So by your logic, she obviously hates Muslims, right? The mind reels.
I'm Patrick Kurelchi.
And I'm Adriana Cortez, and we're the hosts of Red Pilled America, a new storytelling podcast.
Red Pilled America is not another talk show covering the day's news. We are all about telling stories. Stories Hollywood doesn't want you to hear. Stories the media mocks. Stories about everyday Americans that the elites ignore. You could think of Red Pilled America as audio documentaries, and we promise only one thing: the truth.
Visit the iHeartRadio app right now to listen to Red Pilled America.
My hit tip of the week is Ben is back. You know, I've never been a huge fan of Julia Roberts. Yes, she's a big movie star. She's an Oscar winner, but she really won me over with this film. It's a terrific movie. It's also pretty darn overlooked. She plays the mom of a teen addict played by that really great young actor, Lucas Hedges. He's back at home for the holidays, but he really should be in rehab. Can he stay clean long enough to have one of those old-fashioned family Christmases with mom and company? Well, anyone who has an addict in their family, I think they know the answer to that. Pretty depressing. But what follows here is really brilliant. It's beautifully staged. I think the family interactions are absolutely heartbreaking. And I have to say, the second half takes a more of a melodramatic turn. Some of the soap opera-esque elements kind of made it a little less engaging to me. I was still all in. I still cared about the characters, but I wish it had the intensity and the small-scale greatness of that first half. But still a very good movie, and not many people saw it. You know, after I first saw the screening of this movie months ago, I said, wow, Julia Roberts is going to be back in the Oscars game again. I don't know if she's going to win, but how could she not be nominated for this role? She's terrific. Really channeling what it means to be a mom, a parent, for caring for a kid and trying to be kind of do that tough love routine when it hurts the most. But nope, award season completely overlooked her. I don't quite understand things sometimes. It seems like this was a gimme for a nomination or at least some other conversations about her performance, but just didn't happen. No tears for Julia Roberts. She's already got her Oscar. She's got fame and fortune, but she really deserved more attention for this role. Ben and Back is available right now on home video. Now let's get to this week's HitCast interview. I thought I knew just about everything I needed to know about media bias. It's my obsession. I read about it. I read sites like newsbusters.com. I check out Breitbart News, and I see it with my own eyes. I see it every single day. And then I saw Mike Cernovich's Hoaxed, and I realized I only knew part of the story. The film's directors are Scooter Downey and Jon du Toit, and they capture the current state of the media in ways that will absolutely shock you. I know some scenes really shocked me. One involving the aforementioned Tim Poole. Amazing stuff you just don't see anywhere else. It really is a fascinating look at the media, how they fall down in their jobs again and again and again. And of course, what Andrew Breitbart taught us millions of times, it's all about the narrative. So naturally, I wanted to speak to those two gentlemen to find out more about the film and their careers and other information. You can rent the movie now, Hoaxed, at hoaxedmovie.com. So please enjoy my interview with Scooter Downey and Jon du Toit. Well, Scooter and Jon, thanks for joining the show. I want to start out, I'm always kind of curious how people get to the place they are in their careers. So kind of, if you can both give me kind of a bite-sized version of how you got here to be a filmmaker, and you can maybe just say your first name right off the bat so we can kind of get to know your voices. Then from now on, you can, from then on, we'll be fine.
Scooter, you want to go?
Yeah, sure. So this is Scooter. I started making films in high school. I was on a news show in the morning, and this was right before YouTube came out. So I'd make little short films and show them to my high school of 2,000 people, and kind of got hooked on it after that. Went to film school at the University of Miami and came out of film school and decided to try to make my first independent feature film. And I did that with my good friend. And that film was called It's in the Blood, starring Lance Henriksen of B-movie horror icon fame and Aliens. And that took way too long. It took like 4 years from start to finish. And that came out 2012, 2013. And I moved to LA and did some freelance editing gigs and worked as an assistant and did odd jobs and was struggling out here for a while, and then decided to start my own production company and make films that were either faith-based or countercultural in some way, and ended up working for Open Doors, which is a ministry for persecuted Christians, made some documentaries for them. and then got hooked in with Mike Cernovich in 2016 and started doing some short films for him. And that led ultimately to Hoaxed and where I am today.
Excellent. All right, Jon, your turn.
So I basically started. I started making I started drawing my own comic stories, I guess, when I was a kid. This is back when I lived in Belgium, and I guess it was about 12 or 13 years old when that started, and I think that's where I really developed a love for visual storytelling. I dropped out of university in 2004. I was sitting in a philosophy class with 400 other students, and I just realized that this was not, this is not the right place for me. So I dropped out. I never went back to university. Made a deal with my parents that, I told them, I told them I'm not going back, and I want to make movies. So, they made a deal with me that they would support me in that, but I had to go to film school. So I ended up doing that. It was a pretty good experience. I definitely put a lot of effort into that. I started freelancing so I could pay my bills. Did as many short films as I could. Try to get into festivals and that kind of thing. Long story short, I left the film industry because I just knew that it was not going to be a good place for me, just because of my values and my beliefs. So I actually left. I moved to a small town in the middle of nowhere where there's no semblance of a film industry. And I started following Mike Cernovich on Twitter in 2016, and the rest is history.
Gotcha. Jon, before we move on, did anything happen in your early foray with the film industry that kind of scared you away, or did you just kind of sense that, hey, my sensibilities aren't a good match here, so that's why I'm moving on?
No, not particularly. I mean, it was just sort of something that I just came to realize for myself. I mean, the whole reason why I wanted to pursue filmmaking is because I just had this overwhelming sense of a movie that I had to make that I still haven't made yet, by the way. But it was a goal that I had, and I just figured, I'm going to go all in. I'm going to chase it, and that's a retelling of the story of Noah. As a very serious Christian, it just became clear to me that I had a great time. I met a lot of great people. I don't want to knock them or anything. Had a lot of good experiences, but it was not fulfilling, and it was not putting me on the path to meeting that goal, right? So I just figured, I'm just gonna do something else. I'm gonna start writing more screenplays, or I wasn't quite sure what to do, but I just felt strongly I had to leave and move to the small town that I'm in now. And it sort of paid off in a way because. It's a long story. I don't want to get too much into it, but I sort of went into monk mode. I did a lot of work on myself mentally and so on, and it's been a great. It was a good change for me. And then when Hoaxed happened, it was sort of like a confirmation that I made the right decisions.
Gotcha. Well, let's talk about Hoax. When I first heard about this, I thought, well, a documentary on media bias. I read a lot about it. I'm pretty well aware of it. What stone is left to be unturned? And then I watch it, obviously, and I saw there was plenty. But just from your perspective, and either one of you can jump in, what was the main mission here? Because I think there's a lot of material out there about bias. What were you hoping to kind of explore that hasn't been sort of dug into yet?
We didn't want to preach to the converted. We wanted to create a film that somebody who was following the news but not particularly closely, listening to CNN or even Fox News, they're missing a big part of what's going on. And so we wanted to make a film for those people and just show the ways that the media itself can use manipulation to persuade or to or to use deceit as well. So we really wanted to just show the man behind the curtain and reveal that to the vast majority of people. And yeah, there's a lot of stuff that was happening over the past the election year, and it felt like it would be good to go over some of those stories again and show things that people may have missed, because the way the news cycles go nowadays, it's so fast that it's good to slow down, make something that's a little bit of a time capsule, and produce it for a mass audience, because there's been a lot of people that have been believing false stories, including about the president and other things. And so, yeah, we made it for people that are misinformed or are just, following along with the news, made it for that audience.
I'm going to imagine that there are either maybe pieces of the film you left out, or even stories or examples of media bias that you would love to have included but just didn't have the time. Is that true? Anything you can share about that?
Yeah, I mean, we shot about 25, I think something like that. We shot about 25 interviews, and some we had to cut, entirely, like, for example, Owen Benjamin. There's 2 Harvard professors that we could not include in the film. And the ones we did include, a lot we had to just really cut down, right? So that, there's a lot of good material that was left on the cutting room floor, which is why Mike decided to publish a book of the interviews, and why we're now starting to release the full interviews as well. But there's a lot of news stories, like a lot of news hoaxes that we could not include. Our main goal, as Scooter was saying, we wanted to show to the average person, the average voter out there, that you cannot trust the news media, because they have an agenda. They want you to think a certain way. They want you to look at the world a certain way, and then vote based on that perspective of the world. And so it's not that we wanted to show something that's never been shown before. I mean, all this stuff is, it's not like it's not like it's not classified. You know what I mean? So and yeah, we've had some comments of people like, "Oh, I didn't learn anything new," and I'm thinking, well, you missed the point of the film, really. This is to to wake up the average person, and we've had a lot of great feedback on exactly that.
Gotcha. Can I back up 1 second? You mentioned Owen Benjamin. I know of him, but I don't remember him from the film. Is there anything you can share about his what happened with that, or I don't know?
Yeah, it's good again.
Sure. Owen Benjamin was a comedian in Los Angeles and was in a number of different films, like Adam Sandler films, and was well known and respected in the Hollywood community. And he noticed on Twitter that there was somebody in the industry who was trying to raise their child as believe their child to be transgender, and was I from what I recall, I don't know if this is 100% accurate, but they were considering doing like hormone therapy or something to that effect. And Owen started calling this person out on Twitter, and then he lost his agent. He lost all of his gigs. He got blacklisted from Hollywood for opposing that. And then he moved out, and now he's out somewhere in the Pacific Northwest, raising like a farm or something like that. And so we interviewed him about comedy and how that's becoming a way in which the news media can also manipulate opinions, because in a way, the late night comics are now where a lot of people are getting their news from. So we interviewed him about that, but we just ended up not using that particular angle in the film. We just didn't have time to cover it. So
gotcha.
That's why this interview is not in there.
Talk a little bit about the power of media today. I think if your film came out a decade ago, you would say, well, it's online, it's not in theaters. it's not going to have much of an impact. Whereas, if you turn on NBC, that's where you have an impact. But things are changing so dramatically where an online production like what you have can really change minds. And an NBC can be, met with glazed eyes. Just for either one of you, just kind of jump in and just share how things are changing so rapidly and how that impacts your film.
Certainly, I think first of all, I want to say that, the mainstream news media still has a lot of power. They have definitely peaked already a few years ago, I'd say. And you can tell that they're on, that their levels of influence is on a decline. With the advent of the internet and online distribution models, it makes it, much more, it makes movie making on this scale much more accessible to the average person. You still have to hustle, you still have to take huge risks, but at least it's possible, to get out there. And what's really great about working with somebody like Mike is he's already, he's got this huge platform on Twitter, and so he's got a built-in audience, right? Mm-hmm. Now our hope is that the film, and by the way, the film has been doing very well. Sales have exceeded our expectations for it. So that's been really great. Unfortunately, though, we would have liked to see more support from like-minded conservatives who also have their own, online platforms, because, and it's, obviously, yes, it's great to make money and everything. But really, for us, we want the message of this film to be spread far and wide, because everybody who follows these people online, who is sort of, as I say, woke to the, the whole media manipulation thing, is, they each have their own circle of friends, that needs to see this film, right? If we want to, we want to turn this culture around, that's how it starts. And, to just sit there and complain about how things are and not doing anything about it, it's kind of foolish, right? So, we would definitely like to see more support, from conservative circles. And so, again, thanks for having us on, because, this is the kind of thing that really gets the message out.
Why do you think that is? I don't recall, I could be wrong, I don't think Breitbart News covered your film, Hoaxed. And I know that I can almost guarantee that few, if any, major radio show hosts have talked about it. Why do you think that is? What I feel like, I was briefly working with Andrew Breitbart, and his philosophy was always we have to kind of work together and team up, and we're on more or less the same side, even if we have some differences. And the spirit is missing today.
Yeah, I think it is. Well, I think it's kind of inherent to the conservative mindset in a way. It's kind of funny. My background is South African. I come from a line of Boer, Boers, in South Africa, white South Africans, Afrikaners. And, in the Second Boer War, it was, I read a South African book on that the other day. And it was the same kind of thing. You had all these, the mindset is very, it's very independent, and people don't actually like to work together. They like to do their own thing. They like to be left alone. And, when this huge, this huge threat developed, it took a lot of effort, on the part of a small group of people to actually, to actually unite people and be like, okay, we have to cast our small differences aside because there's this huge threat. We have to work together. And they whipped the British for the first half of the war, right? So it's the same thing I see now. I think it's sort of inherent in the mindset where, people are very independent in how they think. They don't follow orders very well. They don't follow other people's leads very well. But at the same time, we have this threat. We've got this huge threat of censorship looming, just sort of hanging above our heads right now. And, people, for some reason, they still want to be God of their own kingdom. And that needs to change if we're going to still be able to have a voice in the future. So
it's ego too. I think it's a lot of it is ego, and people just they are self-obsessed and want to just promote their own thing, and they don't want to lift up others. And then the other part of it too is people probably don't like Mike for whatever reason and don't want to support him or particular people that are in the film.
I want to talk a little bit about Mike, because one of the things that really intrigued me about the film, and I actually talked to him about this a little while ago for HollywoodInToto.com, was he let himself be flawed on screen, where he showed his mistakes. He showed him getting flummoxed on camera when an interviewer was kind of talking to him. From your perspective, the two of you, and either one can kind of chime in, talk about that element of Hoaxed, because I was fascinated by that. It seemed very atypical of this kind of project, but there it was.
Yeah, I mean, it's we knew going in that people were going to try to say that the film was just propaganda, and so we were deliberate about showing flaws on our own side as well as the actual producer of the movie, because it's pretty the obvious thing to say is, oh well, Mike's been accused of spreading fake news. This documentary is about fake news. It's fake. And so we were like, all right, well, we'll just cover everything and include everybody's perspective, and including negative aspects of what Mike has alleged to have done. And by doing that, we are being more honest and we're being more transparent, and we let people decide what they want to believe. And I think in that way, we set ourselves apart from other outlets and other documentaries in that regard, because we're showing both sides. And Mike was open about wanting to do that as well, which is a credit to him.
Gotcha.
Yeah, he's not really one to hide things, and I think it's like very clear that he understands that if you show warts and all, you're actually much more persuasive, because then people have this like implicit trust of like, okay, he's not hiding these sort of like uncouth aspects of his personality. It's just out there front and center right in the beginning of the film. And yeah, it's an important thing, because when you start, it's the whole thing with the Streisand effect, right? If you try to hide something, it's like you're basically inviting a lot more attention to the thing you're trying to hide.
Mm-hmm. The film is not in theaters at the moment, but obviously it's online. You say it's doing well. Talk about spreading the word. You mentioned how Mike Cernovich has his platform and his followers and people who, are curious about what he has to do. But I want maybe share some more about how you're kind of getting the word out, in part because I want other right-of-center artists to maybe learn from what you're doing, the kind of successes you've had, and maybe some practices that haven't been successful for you.
One thing that I think just filmmakers should know going in is that what slowed us down in the end was a lot of legal stuff involving making sure that all the clips that we were using were fair use. So if you're somebody who's wanting to produce something like this, you want to get the legal team on board early on and make sure that you're taking that into account in terms of your launch date. So that would be, kind of, for some people, film school 101, but something that we had to learn the hard way there. But then we ended up being, providentially saved a little bit in terms of our release, because of both the Jussie Smollett and Covington case happened pretty close to our launch date. But yeah, in terms of getting the word out, I think you need to partner with influencers and people that have large platforms and that people trust. And we're also going to be using a program called Tugg, Tugg, and that's basically like on-demand theatrical release, where if you're in a certain city and you want to see the film in theaters, you can request to see it, and if enough people join you in that effort, then the movie will be released. And then I think just exploring alternative platforms and just putting them out there on the mainstream platforms as well. That's all what it's about.
Gotcha.
Yeah,
go ahead.
I think grassroots level, it's important to write about the film. Once you see it, write an honest review about it. If you have a blog, tweet about it, write something on Facebook. That's really how the word of mouth spreads. So that's very important.
Gotcha. I'm going to have a link to tug.com on the show notes page so people can check it out and ask for the movie in a theater near them. One of the things that I think about a lot when I think about what you're talking about, the media, deep down, I need the media. I think we need the media. We need an honest, fair media, and I don't think we have that now. What's the solution? If the media landscape is broken, where do we turn to next? Because I almost fear what happens next could be worse, more dishonest, more toxic. What would be a better future for the media at this point?
Yeah, we've seen, the rise of the citizen journalist on the internet, and I think that's important. I mean, there's some pitfalls there too. There's some challenges. Obviously, as the amount of resources that they have available to them is much less than, say, a CNN or whatever. So it's kind of at this point, we're seeing this kind of symbiotic relationship develop between the mainstream media and the oppositional, online media, with our citizen journalists. And, it's kind of working in some kind of a weird way right now where, maybe CNN breaks a story or, the Washington Post breaks a story and there's a bunch of bias involved with that. And then you have people who will, then actually deliver commentary on that news story and saying, well, they left out this or they left out that, or, this is the way they phrase it. So, that's important to have. It would be nice, though, to see these news outlets that have developed online to, gain more resources so that they can actually send people out into the field and do actual real journalism. Mm-hmm. I think the most important thing, though, is for the consumer to understand, like, you can't just take whatever you read as gospel. There's honest mistakes that are being made, and then there's also people that are pushing narratives. So you always have to take that with a grain of salt.
Mm-hmm. Are there either outlets out there or reporters specifically that either one of you or both of you trust that you can say, hey, if she's got it, I know it's pretty fair, or if he's going to nail this fact down, I'm comfortable with it being true?
I'd probably say Tim Poole, who was on Joe Rogan yesterday. And, he's actually a liberal. I think he supported Bernie Sanders in the election. But he's kind of obsessed with not letting his bias get into his stories, as much as he can. And that's a really good that's a really good quality, right? I mean, it's at the end of the day, it's all about integrity, and look for people who report news with integrity.
I call him a freak, and I mean that in a most complimentary way, and I completely agree. He fights harder for conservatives than almost anyone I know, and he's left of center and reliably so. I'm amazed by what he does, and he's powerful. And his segment in Hoaxed, favorite's sort of a weird way to say it, but it was the most eye-opening for me part of the whole presentation.
Yeah, that was an interesting thing that happened to him, and I think it shows, like he says in the film. I do think that it shows what our news media could become, or it's a canary in the coal mine. Basically, what happened was he went to Sweden to cover some of the migrant and refugee situation that was happening there after Trump spoke about it, and he ended up getting lied about on national TV, and the Swedish media actually goes and they go through the comment sections of articles and dox people that for which opinions they don't agree with, and there's a very, very limited, narrow, it's called the opinion corridor, narrow of freedom of expression there, and it's not necessarily the legal stuff, although that's part of it, but it's also just cultural. If you say things that are outside of this opinion corridor, you get harassed, you lose your job, and so that's the major threat that's looming here, and we're starting to see some of that.
Yeah, it's really scary. That particular part of the film is amazing, and Tim has the footage to back it up, which you show in the movie. Before I let you guys go, let's talk kind of beyond Hoaxed. Do you have film projects you're working on? Anything you can kind of tease, or just maybe even things you'd like to explore next after this particular film?
Yeah, I mean, we've been talking with the team. There's a number, there's a number of potential projects that we want to get going on. For me personally, I'm going to start writing a screenplay on a film I really want to do. That would be amazing if it would get made. And for me personally, that's really what I want to get into is narrative fiction. So that's what I'm going to be working on myself.
Excellent. Scooter, anything you could share?
Yeah, well, we just helped. We just finished a short documentary called Blood Money about foreign influence in Washington D.C. and Qatar's influence in particular, and that'll be released fairly soon. I'm currently editing a feature documentary that will be coming out this summer, but I can't talk about that quite yet. And then we'll probably do another documentary with Mike. And we're not 100% sure what that's going to be about yet, but we'll start on that. And I think both Jon and I, and we want to get into. We love documentaries, but we also want to influence culture in terms of the narrative fiction that's going out there. So if anybody is out there, they have screenplays, or they work in the film industry and want to get involved in this, they can reach out to Jon or myself on Twitter. We're trying to build our team and build our network so we can engage in this cultural battle and just make good films, make good art that reflect our values and the values of many Americans.
And I'll have both of your Twitter handles on the show notes page as well. Thanks, guys, Scooter and Jon, for joining the HitCast. Please watch their amazing documentary, Hoaxed. Even if you think you know all about media bias, there's much more to show and share in the film. It really kind of took me aback, and I've been researching this for quite some time now. So if I'm kind of floored, I think you will be too. Just visit hoaxedmovie.com. Again, all the links will be on the show notes page. Guys, thanks so much. I really appreciate the work you do. I wish more conservative outlets would get your back, but hopefully that will change in the near future.
Absolutely. Thank you very much for having us on.
Well, thanks again for listening. Don't forget to check out HollywoodandToto.com for both the show notes and, of course, the latest entertainment news. Please follow me at Twitter at HollywoodandToto. And we'd love it if you leave a podcast review over at iTunes. See you next week.